Hello, my lovelies. Jenny O here, the author with no last name, and it is October! I thought I could use this month to celebrate the little-known hashtag called Booktober and review some of the traditionally published books I've been reading. Since I've moved, my library is now a 5-minute walk up the street, which is one reason to love a small town, I guess. I've been playing catch-up with fantasy and sci-fi, and my awesome librarians of my tiny library have been really helpful with ordering the books I want and ordering books they think I might like. Shout out to awesome librarians! Also, a shout out to my really amazing library system here in upstate New York, the Finger Lakes Library System, which has so many branches and a really good collection of books. As always, because I'm an author and a development editor myself, my reviews will be my opinions phrased in author terms. Your mileage may vary. In no particular order, let's do it, let's get right to it. Peace Talks and Battleground by Jim Butcher. Harry Dresden has faced down a lot of things in his life. Walkers, necromancers, werewolves, vampires, lots of vampires, fae, his own death, and being a dad. Now, the mysterious Fomor, a race of water beings, have called upon the members of the Accords to talk about peace, and they've chosen Chicago to host. Things are trying to crash together all at once. Harry's brother Thomas has big news. Internal affairs of the Chicago PD are opening a murder investigation against Harry and Karen. The White Council has invoked a no-confidence vote against Harry due to his position as Winter Knight of the Fae. And Lara, titular queen of the White Court of Vampires, has called in favors with Harry's boss Mab. And it seems more and more people are keeping the secrets of Harry's birth from him. Something smells fishy in Chicago. And if things go wrong, as things invariably do, Harry will do everything in his power to protect his brother, his town, and his little girl, even if it means changing the world forever and losing a few friends. Now, if everyone would stop trying to screw him over. So I'm giving this 4.5 cookies as long as you treat it as one book. So because I'm treating this like one book, we get twice the amount of time to talk about it. I was using these 2 books as a benchmark on whether or not I was going to keep the series on my shelves and I was going to continue to read them. At 4.5 cookies, he's obviously it passed, So what I mean by treating them as one book is that everything that is set up in Peace Talks isn't actually wrapped up until Battleground, or, a major step towards being wrapped up until Battleground. So I don't want to talk about these books individually because they aren't really meant to be read individually. If you read, if you read Peace Talks and you're trying to talk about Peace Talks just as Peace Talks, what you're going to say is this is a filler book because it reads like a bunch of filler. It's just a bunch of setup until what happens in Battleground, where there's all the payoff of everything from Peace Talks. And I understand why they would not do this as one book just named Peace Talks, because it would have been a massive book. Like if they were going to try to keep everything Butcher was trying to do in the books and printed it as it is. So it would have been massive, the print cost would have been too high, so they understand why they split it into 2, but it means that both books individually suffer for it, because if you go into Battlegrounds, you're not going to understand anything that's really going on if you haven't read Peace Talks. Now, for both of these books, like, maybe you're somebody who wants to go back and reread every single book every time he puts a new one out. Okay, that's fine. You don't need to. Just go back and read, I believe it's, yes, just to read Skin Game. That's all you need to reread. Everything else from previous is like a 5-second shout out through the book. So all you just need to do is go back, reread Skin Game, and then you can read these two books as one book. Now this is typical Butcher first person point of view of Harry. Interesting narration, you know, it has a very distinct voice. If you like Butcher's style of writing, you're going to like these two books. And good news is the uncomfortable descriptions of women, you know, the male gazy thing that has, I don't know, plagued Butcher's writing for quite a long time. It's since, I really want to say since Changes, he started to tone that down. So it's not quite as uncomfortable reading it. I don't know if it's just Harry's getting older, or if, you know, his editor is going, hey, Jim, buddy, we've gotten so many complaints about this. Could you just tone it down a little? So I don't know what's going on there. But here's what's happened, is in these two books, Butcher has managed to change the stakes of his world, okay? He has managed to kind of push himself into this third, the kind of this huge overall arc he's got going. He's set himself up as the kind of at the top conflict point to push into this denouement of the falling action of what's going to happen next at the end before, you know, we get to this final, I guess he's got this trilogy planned for the end of the series that, you know, that's going to be all sorts of action and adventure or whatever. But he's managed to change the stakes. He's managed to put things in such a way that it's not going to be the same old from the previous books anymore. And it's enough to keep me interested as, you know, as a reader. It's okay, you know, you spent 15, 16 books doing this type of thing. Now the rules have changed. Where are you going to take it? I'm interested to see what happens next. As for the two, you know, as for the books themselves, he made some very interesting and maybe possibly risky decisions here with certain parts of the fandom base, I guess you could call it. I can't blame him. Like, I can't even be mad about some of these decisions that he made in this book, these books. Like, Peace Talks was all this build up to here's what's going to happen, here's what's happening, here's what everybody's, you're starting to see the sides form out, pro-Harry sides and the anti-Harry sides and the who's keeping secrets sides. I mean, everybody's going, Harry, you're keeping secrets, and it's just like, well, duh, he's the Winter Knight and the warden of Merlin's prison. Do you have the classification system to actually be part of those secrets? But you're my friend. Friends have secrets from each other. It's called this thing called boundaries. He's made some very decisions about what he's going to do with these characters next and what happens to the characters, both in what's going up to the battle and what happens during the battle. This is one of those type of books where everything kind of comes together and you're braiding everything together and you're finally getting to see the payoff of everything that's gone on before. Yes, this and that and the other thing, and we still have, you know, a couple threads to tie up with the old enemies, and oh, new enemy! Fun times type of thing. So if you have been invested in these books, and you're like wondering, I don't know if I want to continue with this series or not. As a reader myself, as an author, I'm like, I want to see how he hits this landing, and he cannot stick the landing. I've noticed in the last couple books that there's been a string of books that Butcher has been using the I am deliberately hiding information from the readers, information Harry knows, and he's using it as, you know, to set up stuff to give us gotcha moments, to give you twists at the end. So it's beginning to feel really kind of cheap. So I really want to go back to like the mysteries of, we learn things as Harry learns things, and that Harry's not keeping things so close to the vest that the reader doesn't know them. You know, I don't. You know, when you're with Harry's point of view and you're supposed to be there in Harry's head, it feels kind of weird when Harry is hiding things even for you because the author is trying to do this. Isn't Harry so clever? And isn't this a great twist at the end? I mean, he already had this great twist kind of set up with the new villain that's coming up in the next, you know, set of books. So he didn't really need to be like, I'm gonna hide this from you in peace talks, you know, hide his plan to save himself from Ebenezer, who is screwing Harry over. He didn't need to hide that plan. You know, there's something to be said about, you know, setting up something good and then showing what really happened. Like, that's Ocean's 11. You know, they set up this heist and then they kind of tell you what really happened. But this was not, it was not set up well enough in a way, you know, because we were shown he's talking to Molly and he's asking Molly for a favor, but Jim is not telling us what that favor is. And then, you know, we showed the favor at the end of the book. This is what the favor was and this was what he was doing. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it felt cheap. I'm going to continue to buy these books and read these books. Here's hoping he sticks the landing. The Just City by Joe Walton. For the life of him, Apollo cannot figure out why the nymph Laurel would refuse him so badly she asked to be turned into a tree. The chase was all part of the game, and not even Athena can get through to him the concept of consent. Apollo decides to join his sister Athena's experiment to create Plato's Republic in hopes of learning why mortals think the way they do. Athena chooses a time before the rise of the Greeks and collects the faithful and enough slave children to start the city, along with some robots from the future to help out. Though not everyone is grateful to be included, and though everyone agrees the experiment is doomed to failure, they decide to try anyways. I didn't finish this book. This book is an authorial indulgence on the impracticalities of Plato's Republic. This book, in my opinion, wouldn't have been published if the author hadn't been in the industry for 20 years. There's no plot to speak of, and the actions that the characters take really don't have overall consequences. The characters ramble along doing things for no real reason, following the explicit and not so explicit guidelines Plato set down in his book to create this city and, you know, to educate the children and separating them into the different metals and stuff like that. And, you know, despite the whole point of of philosophy being to question the nature of existence, the adults, the children, and most of them, they're just not doing it. It's just, it's dross. I don't know why the editor didn't sit down and go, hey, you don't really have a plot here. Like, the robots are important, but they aren't important at the same time. Socrates is important. They bring Socrates in once the children reach age 15 or 16 to teach them more about, you know, philosophy and questioning, and because he was, you know, Plato's kind of rival, that sort of thing. So he chooses, you know, the children he thinks, you know, are of the gold medal or whatever it is, and he chooses to talk with them and debate with them or teach them rhetoric or whatever. And he goes around and he talks to all the robots, and, you know, the robots they didn't think were actually intelligent, but actually might be intelligent. And there are children who resent being chosen, and that was never really addressed. This concept that Apollo, we're not really following Apollo as much as you would think, despite the opening chapters. The concept of consent and ownership of your own body isn't expressly addressed in story wise. The whole thing, there's no real main character, there's no real emotions. Everything is very clinical, down to the scenes that would be very triggering to some readers. There are a couple very explicit non-consensual sex scenes in this book. If I use the other word, I don't know, it might be, I don't have any of my videos monetized, but I don't know, it could be reported or something. So this book to me is really an argument to start including trigger warnings in or on books. I know this is a controversial topic. I have seen all sorts of arguments for and against it. A lot of times people are against it because we've never done it that way before, and I don't want to spoil the book. Look, if you have a non-consensual sex scene in your book, and these ones don't forward any plot in any way because there's no conflict, there's no consequences to the actions that happen, there's no emotional or physical results of these non-consensual acts, so they're just gratuitous and should have been cut. There is just the biggest arguments are spoilers. And look, okay, fine. There are some things, major character death, maybe you would consider that a spoiler, okay? There are just people, younger readers especially, people who have grown up with the archives, like fanfiction.net, even though it's not great about about trigger warnings and stuff like that, or LiveJournal. LiveJournal you could make your own, and now the Archive of Our Own, AO3, they all have these choices to put in warnings for things like major character death, non-consensual sex, drug use, gratuitous violence and gore and stuff like that. You have an option of putting things that are commonly triggering to PTSD of any type of people into your tags or into the major archive warnings on the AO3. And so this allows people to go, I don't want to read this today, or I do want to read this today. Don't forget that putting in these archive warnings mean people, if they want to read this stuff, can find it too, okay? That's what it's about. It's about being able to make choices. This is not a book I would honestly have picked out for myself. This was something one of the librarians was like, maybe you'd like this, so I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. And because I'm willing to try just about anything once if it's science fiction or fantasy. And I brought it back and I was like, look, if you want to put this out, give this out to somebody else who likes the concept of Greek and Roman stuff, and with a hint of science fiction because of the robots and the kind of time travel stuff that's going on, you really got to make sure they're okay with non-consensual sex scenes, because there's a couple of them there, and they're very, very common scenarios, and it's very, very triggering. So I really feel like this could have been, feels just like an argument. We need to start putting these trigger warnings on books, because there are people who don't want to read this stuff, and there's people who do want to read this stuff and are okay, and are okay with like, oh, I'll just skip that. type of thing. You know, they like the concept of the story, but if they come across that type of stuff in the story, they're like okay with skimming and or flipping past it to get to the rest of the story. Anyways, philosophical ramblings do not an interesting story make. And the author Joe Walton also seems to have this very, very low opinion on men and their ability to understand a woman's bodily autonomy, ownership of self, and concept of consent. And it's very off-putting. Like, it was just very, very... There was no kind of... These guys understand versus these guys that don't. You know, and it doesn't ever feel like Apollo. We're never with Apollo enough for him to be able to kind of gain this understanding of this is what went wrong when you were chasing the nymph who didn't want to have sex with you. So I just would not recommend this book to anybody, you know, who wants a plot-driven story, a character-driven story, or any story at all. So, The Obsidian Blade by Pete Hotman. Tucker Fay is a typical 13-year-old boy doing things to see what happens and not thinking things through. His life is good until his father disappears one day fixing the roof and returns later with a mysterious silent girl and a cat, all wearing strange, bright blue, plastic, rubbery stockings. Then his father loses his faith. His mother goes mad, and things go downhill until both parents disappear, leaving him in the care of his uncle. Tucker is sure there is something strange going on in the roof of his family home, and if he can get up there and go through the strange disc portal, he can find his family, and all will be normal again. 3 cookies. I'm giving this 3 cookies because it was not terrible, terrible, horrible, not my cup of tea. I managed to get through it, but it's not amazing or great or I'd recommend this to all my friends either. To me, this is yet another book that wouldn't have been published if the author hadn't been in the industry like 20 years. The character for a 13-year-old boy is really, really flat. Again, this is a plot-driven book. Things happen to this kid. He very rarely makes, you know, choices. I mean, he does make choices to go through the discs, through the portals in the time, but once he does, things start just kind of happening to him out of his control, and he's reacting, not acting. The Obsidian Blade of the title isn't actually important either. Like, it never comes into his possession type of thing. He's not... It's... You know, for a MacGuffin, it's just... You're not chasing after it. You don't... You know, you're not... It's just an item that happens to exist in the book, and they named the book after it. So, I'm not sure what the goal of the book was here. I don't know if his goal, like, I think Tucker's personal goal was to have his family, you know, be normal again. You know, have a father, his pastor father, you know, being in his faith and with his church and stuff like that. And yes, he's a little distant and a little hard, but, you know, at least he thinks his dad loves him, and, you know, his mother who dotes on him and stuff like that. I think he wanted his family back, but it was not written personally in such a way where we kind of felt Tucker's... We didn't really feel it, or I didn't really feel anything with Tucker. Once he got into the other time zones, this whole, it just, that goal fell apart. And, like, he didn't have anything else as a goal to replace it. Like, we had to replace the goal, and there was no replacement goal. There was no goal for him to either to stop the future or preserve the past. It it just, things were happening, and I was just like, where are we going with this? Why are we doing this? At what point do we start taking action again? I mean, the prose is fine. The sentences, the words in order are fine. They're readable. You know, there's no reason for me to really stop turning pages, but there's no real reason for me to keep turning pages either. It didn't feel memorable. It didn't make me want to go pick up the next book, which I guess is from the point of view of the girl that the dad rescued. And the whole book revolves around this conceit of the time travel, where the time portals are at, you know, horrible places of human history, and then, and because they're at these horrible places of human history, Christianity is fake, and technology is bad, and, you know, I've seen these type of themes before. It felt like the book was written for these themes rather than as an interesting story of the character going on a journey, and it was just a muddled mess, and I was just waiting for the point. I was just waiting for what is the point of going on here. So, and then he takes action at the very end of the book, and then you're supposed to go read the second book, and I was just like, I can't care. I can't. I also find it really ironic that supposedly portal fantasy is not a thing. It's dead on arrival. With publishers like, oh, kids don't want to read more stories like Narnia, even though I think Lionsgate is putting out a Narnia ripoff movie with all female characters in the very near future. Which I was like, well, this would be cool if the plot wasn't so blatantly Narnia. You know? But this guy is writing, Pete here is writing portal science fiction, and that's okay because it's time travel. So, I don't know, 3 ginger snap, 3 cookies, I was not impressed. Maybe the point of view of teenage boys is not for me. Have you read any of these books? What's your opinion? Sound off in the comments below. If any of these books sound interesting to you, please support your local library, and if it's anything like mine, they'll tell you how much money you're saving. Woot! Also, please try supporting the authors of books you really love by buying their books and leaving them reviews, and most importantly, telling your friends. Happy Booktober! Thanks for listening. Bless, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.